when you're going out clubbing or you're out for the night or whatever, and at the end of the night people get toned and say, oh, I'm monged or I'm cabbaged or whatever. I don't think they realise where the word originated from. To them it's a word that describes I'm tired, or I want to go to bed, or I can't walk, I'm too sleepy, or whatever.
I remember once going to a disablement services centre, and almost before I'd got into reception, the person that had met me had called me love, darling, sweetie pie and honey. I said, excuse me, my name is Professor Oliver and I've worked very hard for the title. I would appreciate it if you would use it.
When you're feeling low, you'll always hark back to somebody saying, as a kid, we don't like spazzos in our gang.
Hello. Today on From The Edge, we're going to be looking at words. And we have a special guest here to help us, PC Smartword.
Evening all.
PC Smartword, you're going to be helping us sort out the good words from the bad ones.
That's right, Mick, because you know words are always changing, and it's so important to keep up with the latest trends.
Now, you've got some words with you to show us what you mean, haven't you, PC Smartword?
That's right, Mick. Here's a couple I prepared earlier.
Gimme. Well, I think we all know what's wrong with this one. Now, some of our older viewers might not know what's wrong with this word. Perhaps you could explain why some words cease to be appropriate.
Well, no, I'm afraid I can't, but I know a man who can.
Handicap itself, as a generic term, emerged because of the coming to prominence of charities in the 18th and the 19th century. And disabled people, often because they're excluded from the workforce and therefore were forced into begging, were seen to be people with cap in hand.
Language has always changed in relation to disability. If you think about the words that were used to describe so-called mental handicap earlier this century, the terminology in the legislation and used by the medical profession were imbecile, idiot, words like severely defective, educationally subnormal. The words changed as the century moved on, and it was entirely accepted because it was doctors, professionals who were changing the words. Now it's disabled people who are saying, sorry, we don't want to be called mentally handicapped. We prefer people with learning difficulties. So disabled people are taking the language themselves and saying, this is what we prefer to be called.
For thousands of years, I think, disabled people were described descriptively. There were fools, there were the lame, the deaf, the dumb in society. What's interesting is that the language of disability, as we would understand it today, only began to emerge with the Industrial Revolution. There was no word for disabled and disability until we had words for normality. Disabled people became excluded from the process of work, and as a consequence of that, they presented as a social problem needing to be controlled.
Well, that's all very interesting, but what do you actually do when you're faced with abusive or offensive language? I mean, if you were to call me a crip right now, I'd punch your lights out.
Oh, would you now?
Yeah, but I'm not sure that would always be the right approach.
Well, let's find out, shall we?
I like to not actually jump down people's throats. I might say to a taxi driver who says, oh, you suffer from cerebral palsy, I might gently correct and say, no, I don't suffer actually, it's a condition. Because in my view, if you bark at people, you'll put them off. And if you explain why it's offensive and what the other terminology might use, then surely that's a better argument.
But it's not always the naughty words that upset people.
Isn't it?
No, even the nice words can sometimes cause offence.
terms like brave and courageous are used quite indiscriminately about activities that are not brave and courageous. They just go along with having this particular condition or impairment. They don't make sense as words. There's no distinction between being genuinely brave and courageous and simply existing as a disabled person.
We still have these heart-rending stories in the newspaper, you know. Margie Woodward got out of bed despite suffering from cerebral palsy.
Now, perhaps we can draw up a list of good and bad words. You could try this at home yourself later if you like. But let's see what a cross-section of society thinks, shall we?
Words like special, I hate that word, cripple, spaz, mong, spacker.
Don't use the word handicap because it doesn't make sense. You know, you handicap horses to have an even race, and you can hardly turn it back onto people that way.
Crippled, I don't like invalid, I don't like handicapped, victim.
If you call me an invalid, you're saying I'm invalid, and I'm not going to have anything to do with people who think I'm invalid. If you call me a disabled person, however, it makes me think that maybe you're more informed. I'm going to have something to do with you.
Well, I blame the kids.
Well, I blame the parents.
I blame society.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Children aren't born with prejudices. They get those thrust on them by adults or by things that happen to them. They accept you as you are, not by a label. But because they hear people calling each other spazos or spastics or cripples or whatever, they then adopt it because they obviously think it's clever or funny.
Right, well, I think it's about time we saw if any of our viewers have got any questions. Oh, look, a letter from a regular viewer. Oh, it's from young Johnny Burt, who's 7, and he asks, when me and my friend Christopher go down the pub, I sometimes call him Crip, and he sometimes calls me Eppie. Is this wrong?
That's an interesting point you've raised there, Johnny. Are we being hypocritical in demanding that people use respectful terms when talking to us, but when we talk to each other, we use all these wrong words?
Reclaiming words, it's in a way, it's a form of humour, really, because it's like I could call another person with a disability a Crip and say, oh, you're Crip. And it's highlighting what we've all been called in the past and what was quite a common word in years ago or whatever. And it's sort of like saying, can you believe people actually used to say that?
So tell me, PC Smart Word, do words really matter? I mean, sticks and stones may break my bones, but a rose by any other name smells just as sweet.
Is your medication kicking in, or what? I think we should take a look at this.
Words matter because it's the way of communication, and certain words people use, you can sort of like get a feeling of what type of person they are, what attitudes they've got. You can tell a lot by a person's attitude by what words they select.
We react to language. The way you address me actually encourages me to respond in a pleasant way or in a way that, you know, is resistant. Why would one say it isn't important what's said, it's what we mean? Because what we mean is what we say.
It's about changing social reality. We as disabled people begin to have an influence on the way the world talks about us. We are beginning to have an influence on the way the world thinks about us, and ultimately what the world will do about us. And therefore connecting all those levels of the way in which reality is constructed and ultimately created is of fundamental importance to our survival as a collective bit of humanity.